Upon the death of Abu Talib, another of Muhammad's uncles, Abu Lahab, became the leader of the Hashim clan, a man who was hostile towards the Prophet and his message, and withdrew the protection that Abu Talib had previously maintained. Muhammad and his followers were now at the mercy of the Quraysh. Muhammad was desperate to come to terms with the Quraysh and reach a compromise to protect his family, friends and followers, whereupon he received another revelation. This divine diktat from Jibreel confirmed the existence of 3 Arabian goddesses, said to be the daughters of Muhammad's god. This revelation was met with widespread approval from the Quraysh, who honoured Muhammad for his change of heart. The Prophet was riddled by doubt, however, as he was unable to square this new message of henotheism with the old message of monotheism, a puzzle that caused him much grief. His angst was allayed and his conundrum cleared when he received another revelation from Jibreel, explaining that the previous revelation pertaining to the daughters of God had in fact been interpolated and corrupted by Shaitan, and that the message of pure monotheism remained. Muhammad immediately rescinded his previous statements concerning the goddesses, and again earned the enmity and contempt of the Meccan populace. In 620 CE, Muhammad underwent a profound preternatural experience one night as he lay on the edge of sleep. As he dozed in the darkness, Jibreel appeared to Muhammad and disemboweled him, washing his gizzards with holy water before resealing his abdomen. The angel then led Muhammad to a magical Babylonian lamassu, a sphinx with the body of an equine instead of a feline, known as El Burak. The Burak flew Muhammad to the holy city of Jerusalem, where he communed and prayed with Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and various other messengers of God, before ascending up to heaven with Jibreel. After passing through the gates of heaven, Muhammad rose through the 7 layers of the afterlife, meeting many different prophets and witnessing the joys of paradise until he reached the top and met God himself. After debating with God, with input from Moses, about the number of prayers a believer should engage in every day, they settled upon the number 5, and Muhammad returned to Mecca. As conditions in Mecca worsened and the followers of Muhammad faced more and more persecution, the Prophet sent many of his devotees to live in Yathrib, the city where his father was buried. In Yathrib, his followers found solace and refuge, and were free to express their beliefs. Yathrib was proliferated with Jews, who were divided into 3 tribes, the Kanuka, the Nadir, and the Qurayza, who until recently had controlled the city. At Muhammad's time, however, the balance of power had shifted to 2 Arab tribes, Aus and Khazraj, who were fighting each other for control over the city. Some of these Arabs converted to Islam, and along with the Meccan Muslims living in Yathrib, they called for the Prophet Muhammad to come and live with them, a call that was strengthened by the prevailing beliefs of the Yathrib Jewry that a new prophet from God was imminent. This was coupled with the Aus tribe and the Khazraj tribe's need for an objective mediator to solve their conflict, which created a powerful incentive for Muhammad, who had gained a positive reputation in Yathrib thanks to the proselytizing of his loyal followers, to leave Mecca behind and move to Yathrib. The final push came when Muhammad gained word of a plot to take his life that was fermenting amongst his fellow Meccans, so in the dead of night, he and his last followers left Mecca and migrated to Yathrib in an event that would later become known as the Hijra. Muhammad received a royal welcome in Yathrib, where he and his community thrived in unity with the local Arabs. He gained many new converts to his religion, and used his position of influence to begin grafting Yathrib into a theocracy. The first mosque was built, Masjid el-Quba, and the city was renamed Medinat un-Nabawi, the city of the Prophet, which became shortened to simply Medina. The Jews, in contrast to the Arabs, were disappointed, however, as it became apparent to them that Muhammad was not their prophesied leader, and gradually came to see the growing Muslim community as a threat. Muhammad tried to gain their approval and even started praying towards Jerusalem instead of Mecca, and observing the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, but when it became clear that he was getting nowhere, he abandoned these practices. Worst of all, however, was the ridicule that Muhammad received from those Jews familiar with the scriptures, who openly mocked and exposed Muhammad's ignorance of biblical and midrashic narratives. Muhammad's hatred of the Jews stemmed from this experience, and in perfect synchronicity, the revelations of Jibreel began to debase and condemn the Jews, who were accused of corrupting scripture and straying from true devotion to God. Another group who were condemned and debased in Jibrail's timely dictations were the so-called munafiqeen, or hypocrites, those Arabs in Medina who ignored the Prophet's message or defied his authority. Those Arabs who did submit and follow Muhammad, by contrast, were labelled the Ansar, or helpers. It was in Medina that Muhammad married his second wife, Aisha. After the death of his first wife Khadijah, Muhammad had been stricken by grief, but Jibreel appeared to him in a dream to show him his wife to be in infant form, Aisha. Aisha was the 6-year-old daughter of Abu Bakr, and after pressure from Muhammad, he agreed to give her hand in marriage to the Prophet. They were promptly engaged in Mecca, but it wasn't until after the Hijrah, 3 years later, in Medina, that the marriage was consummated, when Aisha was a prepubescent girl of 9 years of age. In 623 CE, Muhammad, buoyed by the divine sanctions as dictated by Jibreel, began to launch raids on Meccan caravans without any initial success. The first successful and memorable foray was the Nakhla raid, in which Muhammad's men attacked a Meccan caravan during the month of Rajab. The month of Rajab was sacred to all Arabs, including Muhammad's followers, and during this time no violence or warfare was to be committed. Even Muhammad's followers in Medina were outraged by this gross breach of etiquette when they heard of the raid, but fortunately for Muhammad, Jibreel gifted him with a timely revelation that dismissed the sacred month of Rajab as nothing more than a polytheistic superstition. In response to this affront and violation, Mecca declared war on the Muslims of Medina. The first real conflict between these two forces was the Battle of Badr in 624 CE, wherein the followers of Muhammad, buoyed by revelations declaring a divine backing for the believers, defeated a much larger Qurayshi army that was sent from Mecca to subdue them. The Prophet and his forces had been pursuing a Meccan caravan, but in doing so they incurred the wrath of the Quraysh, who sent an army to destroy them. Muhammad and his forces caught wind of this army and established their defence at a place known as Badr, where they were able to successfully fend off the larger army sent to crush them. Muhammad and his followers took their victory to be God-given, and a sign proving the truth of Islam, and gained much in the way of booty from the bodies of the slain. It was here that Jibreel revealed God's wish for Muhammad to receive 1/5 of all spoils obtained in war. As for those Quraysh who had been taken captive, Muhammad exacted a cruel revenge for the oppression he had received in Mecca, murdering many of them without mercy. Soon after the Battle of Badr, Muhammad married the widowed daughter of Omar ibn al-Khattab, Hafsa bint Omar, and another widow by the name of Zainab bint Khuzaymah, who grew ill and died sometime afterwards. At this time he had 3 wives, excluding the dead Zainab: Hafsa, child Aisha, and also an elderly woman named Sauda bin Sama, who he had married soon after the Hijrah. Muhammad's power and influence grew after his victory at Badr, as did his intolerance towards non-Muslims, particularly the Jews. Clouting his newfound authority, Muhammad authorized and commanded his followers to silence his most prominent critics. The first was Abu Afak, an elderly Jew who had written satirical poetry concerning the Prophet, and was subsequently stabbed to death. The next victim of Muhammad's pride was a Jewess by the name of Asma bint Marwan, who had also mocked and criticized the Prophet in her poetry. She was stabbed to death by a Muslim whilst asleep with her baby child, an action that Muhammad applauded. Another notable critic of Muhammad was Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, also a Jew, who was dismayed when he heard of Muhammad's killing of 2 noble Qurayshi men during the Battle of Badr, and in response began to write erotic poetry about Muslim women. In retaliation, Muhammad had him murdered. Muhammad didn't just limit his scope to just Jewish individuals, however. Shortly after the assassinations, he turned upon the Jewish Kunaika tribe, who had defied his authority when he had initially attempted to impose it upon them, using his revelations. Shortly afterwards, a Kunuka man played a prank on a Muslim woman that resulted in her being stripped naked in public, whereupon a Muslim attacked and murdered the Jew. The victim's friends and family slew the Muslim in retaliation, a situation that Muhammad seized upon and used to subdue the Kunuka. He held the entire Jewish tribe responsible for the situation and threatened to slay them all if they didn't convert to Islam. The Kunuka defied Muhammad and barricaded themselves into their section of the city, but he cut off their water supply and besieged them until they surrendered. He intended to murder them all for their defiance, but the leader of the Arab Khazraj tribe, Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, whom the Jewish Kunaika tribe had supported previously, grabbed Muhammad by his collar and intimidated the Prophet into sparing their lives. For this, Abdullah was labelled the leader of the Munafiqeen, hypocrites, in Muhammad's revelations, but the Kunuka tribe was allowed to leave Medina alive and travelled north to Syria. In 625 CE, a year after the Battle of Badr, the Meccan Quraysh again sent an army to defeat Muhammad, who had cut off their trading routes to Syria and was thusly a threat to their very survival. When Muhammad and his followers went to meet the Meccan military, the forces of Abdullah ibn Ubay, the so-called chief of the hypocrites, withdrew from Muhammad's army in protest to Muhammad not heeding Abdullah's advice concerning the imminent conflict. After producing damning revelations in response, which further attacked the hypocrites, Muhammad and his army proceeded onwards to meet the Meccans near a mountain called Uhud. At first Muhammad's forces were victorious, but the battle turned and the Muslims were routed. Muhammad barely escaped with his life and fled with his companions up the mountain. The Quraysh returned to Mecca victorious, whilst Muhammad and his followers fled back to Medina.